We are about to step into a small town print shop, but tread carefully. Every page here could be dangerous. Each letter is set by hand, each sheet pressed, dried, and sent out into the world. These words don't just carry the news. They challenge kings, rally armies, and risk the noose for revolution. It all begins here, in Isaiah Thomas's print shop.
Welcome to the Isaiah Thomas Print Shop. I'm Isaiah Thomas, proprietor. Today I'm going to show you the operation of this 18th century printing press. This press is common to the presses that were used throughout the colonies during the American colonial period. So I'm going to bring a clean piece of paper, put it up here onto the tympan of the press, and I'll close the frisket, which will hold that paper in place when it's time to lower it down into the ink. Speaking of the ink, that's what we have here. So these are called ink balls. We have a little bit of ink right on this one. We will use these ink balls in a pair to be able to spread that ink around. And then we will use these tools to put the ink onto the form that we're printing. So we'll bring this right down here and just make sure we get even coverage of the ink. Once we've covered over everything a couple of times, we'll now lower the tympan and the frisket with the paper down into the ink. Now this crank here allows me to bring the carriage beneath the platen, which is where the action happens. This is what's going to make the image. So watch what happens to the platen as I pull the handle across. It's going to go down and press the paper into the ink, which is why this is called a printing press. Now we'll bring that page out, and we should have another copy of this March 1776 proclamation, where the Second Continental Congress is calling for a North America-wide day of fasting and prayer to seek the blessings of the Almighty in the current conflict with Great Britain. When I was only 5 years old, my father was killed in an accident. My mother was not able to afford to raise the 6 children, so a couple of my sisters went to live with their uncle in Connecticut, and I then, as the man of the family, found myself to be in need of gainful work. I actually began working at age 6 and was apprenticed using this document at age 7 as an apprentice printer. So this document is really interesting. As you can see, it's a form that will have the details about who's being indentured and what the terms of the indenture are. But some of the things at the time were just non-negotiable. For example, fornication he shall not commit. Matrimony, on the other hand, is left blank, and so that could be an option. For me, I was not allowed to contract matrimony until after my indenture, which ended at age 21. So this document is an etching that was made by Paul Revere in 1770, and it's known today, of course, as the Boston Massacre. And it was created very quickly after the event. Within 3 weeks, this etching had been made and was being printed and sold. As you look at this document, you will see that we have Captain Preston here with his sword inclined, giving the order to attack. Over here on the other side, we see the colonists who seem to be guilty of nothing more than bleeding in the street. And of course, this is a very stylized depiction of what happened, nothing near what the real truth was. The conflict that happened between the 29th Regiment and the colonists started the Friday before. Tensions had been long running, but the 29th Regiment had some issues with the rope makers at Gray's Rope Walk. There were some harsh words exchanged, and even it came to blows on a couple of different occasions. Powder keg finally lit on that Monday evening. But this image defined the way that America thought about the events in Boston. This is an official British proclamation that comes from the Crown. You will see this royal crest here at the top. We have the lion, which is the symbol of England. We have the unicorn, which is the symbol of Scotland. We have the rose, and we have the thistle. So this is the symbol of the monarch of Great Britain. And then at the end, they always say, God save the king. King George III at this time. Although the king probably isn't directly involved in this proclamation, it's an official proclamation that is given by his governor of Virginia. He's an appointed governor, not elected. And it is particularly dealing with the Second Continental Congress. Governor Dunmore has heard about what happened in the First Continental Congress, and he thinks this is a really amazing thing because there's no legal basis for these men to get together and make decisions among the colonies. In fact, the idea of the United Colonies of America didn't make any sense to the people in Great Britain, certainly not to the king and his men. And so this proclamation is actually ordering that no one from Virginia go to the Second Continental Congress. Of course, many great men ignored him. George Washington went as a delegate to that Congress, Richard Henry Lee, and Thomas Jefferson as well. And so they ignored this proclamation, which had the full force and authority of the government of Virginia, but really ordering that the colonists really don't have the right to assemble to petition the government for a redress of their grievances. Here now, the Second Continental Congress in March of 1776. This time they're still arguing amongst themselves about what's the right course to take with Great Britain. By this time we've been at war with Great Britain now for close to 11 months. We've had the Battle of Lexington, the Battle of Bunker Hill, of course the Battle of Concord. The Congress has authorized American private volunteers or privateers to arm themselves and attack British shipping, which they've done with great success by this time. We understand that we are at war with Great Britain. Should we seek our independence and ask for help from foreign nations, or should we try to reconcile with Great Britain? The one thing it seems that they can agree on is that if we're going to get out of this mess with Great Britain, we're going to need the help of Almighty God. And so they make this proclamation to call for a day of fasting. It starts out, in times of impending calamity and distress, when the liberties of America are imminently endangered, the Congress do earnestly recommend that Friday, the 17th day of May next, be observed in the said colonies as a day of humiliation, fasting, and prayer, that we may with united hearts confess and bewail our manifold sins and transgressions, and by a sincere repentance and amendment of life appease his righteous displeasure. And it is recommended to Christians of all denominations to assemble for public worship and to abstain from servile labor on the said day, by order of Congress, John Hancock, President. And so this was actually probably written by hand and sent to each of the 13 colonies. And then when it got to Massachusetts, our representatives decided this was something that we should publish and send out to all of the churches, all of the houses of worship. And so here in Massachusetts, we added this: read and accepted and ordered that a suitable number be printed in order that each of the religious assemblies of this colony may be furnished with the same. And then it is again endorsed by the representatives of the people of Massachusetts. And so these were then printed and sent it out to every house of worship in the colony of Massachusetts. Now, this is similar to the last proclamation that we saw, and yet in America we don't have a royal crest. We have just here at the top, in Congress. This will stick. When we look at the Declaration of Independence some months later, it'll be the same thing, in Congress, and that's how we will start our proclamations here in America. And yet at the bottom, it seems that we should have something similar to kind of conclude it, but saying God save the king just doesn't quite sound right. And so here what you'll see is God save the people. And today this seems a little more French than American to us, and this doesn't really catch on. We see very few proclamations with this closing here at the end. So it's a form that was pre-printed and used to commission officers in the Army of the United Colonies. And so it seems strange to think that we actually have a Continental Army even before we've declared independence. The wording begins, the delegates of the colonies of New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, etc. We're making this proclamation where we will say a certain individual, reposing a special trust and confidence in your patriotism and valor, do appoint you to this rank as an officer in the Army of the United Colonies. And we fill in your rank a couple of extra times, and it would be signed by the current President of Congress, which would have been John Hancock for most of the people that use this particular form. We find ourselves in a struggle with Great Britain, who is without question the most powerful military force of the 18th century. They have dominance, particularly they have dominance on the seas. We, here in America, there is no Navy of the United Colonies, even though we have an army. And so we're seeking for a way to be able to have some level of competition with Great Britain on the high seas. And so what the Congress will do, again, in April of 1776, is they will authorize private individuals to outfit their ships as ships of war and to seek prizes on the high seas. That is, to attack British shipping, both commercial and military, and take whatever they can capture there, and they are able to keep a portion of that. Now, in one sense, these seem like pirates because they are attacking ships on the high sea. But because they have the authority of the Second Continental Congress, then they are what we would call privateers. The word comes from private volunteers. And so this is the call for people to outfit their ships as ships of war. And that comes along with a set of 11 rules that they must follow to be treated as privateers rather than as pirates. Part of this designates that when a ship is taken, when a prize is taken, it must be taken to the nearest convenient port so that it can be reported and the contents can be cataloged so that Congress can get a portion of the proceeds and the rest of the proceeds can then be given to the privateers. There was a specific exception that they were not allowed to take any prisoners. You're not allowed to ransom people. You're taking the property, but you're not capturing the men. Here what we see is also that 1/3 at least of your whole company shall be landsmen. You're not allowed to outfit your ship and take all the good sailors. You've got to take some that you're teaching how to be sailors as well. So this is actually printed in 1777 after we've declared our independence, but this is an advertisement that's taken out by John Paul Jones as he's outfitting his first private ship to attack British shipping on the high seas. As you see, it's a great encouragement for seamen. Let's read part of this. He calls for all gentlemen seamen and able-bodied landsmen who have a mind to distinguish themselves in the glorious cause of their country and to make their fortunes. An opportunity now awaits aboard Ranger. John Paul Jones will successfully recruit a set of men to come, and he will have such success attacking British ships on the Ranger that he will get direct notice by the King of France, who will grant him the Bonhomme Richard, a much larger ship, for him to continue his attacks on the British on the high seas. Of course, at this time, the British and the French are perennial enemies, going from one war to another between the two of them. And so it is on the Bonhomme Richard that when called to surrender, as the battle is not going well, that John Paul Jones will utter the immortal words, "Surrender, sir, I have not yet begun to fight." The Bonhomme Richard will capture the Serapis. After transporting the crew of both ships onto the Serapis, the Bonhomme Richard will sink. Early 1775, we're getting very close to the outbreak of open hostilities happening here on land. The first open battle of the American Revolution is the Battle of Lexington. That story is printed right here in the Massachusetts Spy, the most popular newspaper in North America. I began this paper with my old master back in 1771. In just a few years, it became the most popular newspaper in Boston, and by 1776, it's the most popular newspaper in North America. A large paper of the day might have 600 to 1,000 subscribers. By 76, the Spy has 3,500, and it is read throughout the colonies. Every newspaper of the day has what's called a masthead at the top, something very distinctive, so that when you look at the paper, even from a distance, you'll be able to know what newspaper it is. And so this was actually carved. The plate to make this was etched by a Boston silversmith that history has come to revere. You may have guessed that it was, in fact, my friend Paul Revere who etched this particular masthead. Paul Revere is most famous for his ride on April 18th, 1775, where he goes to warn Sam Adams and John Hancock that the British are on their way to seize munitions that we have hidden at Concord, but they have a second directive to try to capture Hancock and Adams as well. Revere was one of dozens of riders that made similar rides that night. I myself rode my horse into the outlying communities to warn the militia that the British regulars were headed to Concord. Unlike Mr. Revere, on the morning of April 19th, 1775, I took my musket and I assembled on the Lexington Green with the Lexington militia. I was there when the very first shot of the American Revolution was fired. And of course, as a newspaper man, this was big news, perhaps the biggest story of my career. And so I wanted to get this printed as quickly as possible. This then stands to this day as the very first published eyewitness account of the Battle of Lexington. The teachers of history have some question about who fired the first shot. Well, I will tell you who fired the first shot because I was there and I saw it. A company of militia of about 80 men mustered near the meeting house. The troops came into sight of them just before sunrise. The militia, upon seeing the troops, began to disperse. The troops then set out upon a run, hallooing and huzzahing and coming within a few rods of them. The commanding officer accosted the militia in words to this effect: "Disperse, you damned rebels! Damn you, disperse!" Upon which the troops again huzzahed, and immediately 1 or 2 officers discharged their pistols, which were instantaneously followed by the firing of 4 or 5 of the soldiers, and then there seemed to be a general discharge from the whole body. It is to be noticed, they fired upon our people as they were dispersing, agreeable to their command, and that we did not even return fire. Not only did the British fire first, but they fired on our backs like the cowards that they are. Perhaps not an entirely unbiased account, but the first published eyewitness account of the Battle of Lexington. Or shortly after this, the military governor of Massachusetts, Governor Gage, will close the city of Boston. No one is allowed in or out. This presents him a few problems. One problem is he's got patriots inside the city who would much rather not be inside the city. He doesn't really want them there. There are loyalists outside the city that would prefer to be in the city of Boston under the protection of the martial law which has been proclaimed in Boston. And so he makes a deal with the Provincial Congress of Massachusetts to allow those people who want to leave Boston to leave. Those people who want to come in with the condition that they are not allowed to transport, either in or out, any arms. So no ammunition, no firearms. And so in so doing, they will then print this form, which is the permit that would be filled out and signed by an authorized individual to allow someone to pass either in or out of Boston, depending on which direction that they wanted to go. And so this would be filled out with the name of the family, consisting of how many persons are in the family, and designating that they're allowed to come in or out at a particular time. Now also in this copy of the Massachusetts Spy, we have a very interesting reference to this particular document. What we see here comes from the Provincial Congress, April 30th, 1775. Whereas an agreement has been made between General Gage and the inhabitants of the town of Boston for the removal of the persons and effects of such inhabitants of the town of Boston who may be so disposed, accepting their firearms and ammunition into the country, resolved that any of the inhabitants of this colony who may incline to go into the town of Boston with their effects, firearms and ammunition accepted, have the tolerance for that purpose, and that they be protected from any injury or insult whatsoever in their removal to Boston, and that this resolution be immediately published. P.S. Officers are appointed for the giving of permits for the above purposes, one at the Sign of the Sun in Charleston and another one at the house of Mr. John Groton in Roxbury. And so we have the Continental Congress then making that proclamation saying as so long as people are allowed to come out of Boston with their items, we want to allow anyone who's disposed to go into Boston, and that they should be given both a pass and that not be molested in their approach to go to Boston. I, Isaiah Thomas, had several run-ins with the government in my early days of printing and always avoided printing anything for the government. In fact, when I was just a journeyman printer, I was called before the Colonial Assembly of Nova Scotia because I printed an article that suggested that the people of Nova Scotia were not happy with the Stamp Act, of course, 1765. And so ever after that, I resolved not to print for the government because I did not want to have the undue pressure that having a formal relationship with the government brought. The one exception I made in the rest of my life was printing this 23-page booklet. The official report from the Massachusetts Provincial Congress of the battles of Lexington and Concord. It is a brief description of what happened, and then we have page after page of affidavits signed by the Justice of the Peace as well as the individuals who were describing what happened. I agreed to print this for the government on this one occasion because my press was the only free press in Massachusetts at the time. Just 3 days before the Battle of Lexington, on the advice of John Hancock, I smuggled my press out of Boston. We relocated it to Worcester, Massachusetts. It remained there for the remainder of the Revolutionary War. And because I had gotten it out of Boston, it was the only press in Massachusetts that was not under control of the British. Recognizing the importance of getting the Massachusetts version of what happened into the hands of the world quickly, I consented to print this document. We printed it very quickly, and we put it on a fast ship, and it beat the British report of the Battle of Lexington to London by fully 2 weeks. Literally, by the time the account of the British reached Parliament, virtually everyone had already read the American version of the battles of Lexington and Concord. And that was because at least excerpts of this were picked up and reprinted by virtually every London newspaper. We understood at that time how important it was to control the flow of information and to get our story out in advance. During the occupation of Boston, Governor Gage was issuing commands regularly with the crest of King George, in this version of his crest, GR, which is the Latin name for King George, would we say Georgius Rex. Here is an order from General Gage for everyone living in Boston to surrender all of their firearms. You're not allowed to possess a firearm if you are in the city of Boston during this time. He says that whereas, notwithstanding the repeated assurances of the selectmen and others that all the inhabitants of the town of Boston had delivered their firearms to the persons appointed to receive them, I have had advice at the same time of the contrary, and whereas I have since had full proof that many have been perfidious in this respect, I have secreted great numbers. I have thought to issue this proclamation requiring all persons who have yet firearms in their possessions immediately to surrender them at the courthouse. So again, a proclamation from the official British representative of the Crown saying that we do not have the right to bear arms. After the Battle of Lexington, we will have the Battle of Bunker Hill. A moral victory showed that American militiamen fighting for their homes and their families could stand up against the most disciplined fighting force of the day. They held their positions for 3 separate attacks of the British Redcoats. Ultimately, having run out of ammunition, the militia were obliged to yield the hill, at which time the British occupied Bunker Hill and the Americans fell back to Prospect Hill. Shortly after that, we printed this, America's very first piece of wartime propaganda. It compares the condition of the Massachusetts militia over here on Prospect Hill with the British troops that are now encamped on Bunkers Hill. It says that over here we get $7 a month. On Bunker Hill, you get 3 cents a day. Here, fresh provisions and in plenty. There, you'll get rotten salt pork. Here, you'll have health. There, you'll have the scurvy. Here, freedom, ease, affluence, and a good farm. There, slavery, beggary, and want. It was our desire to get this into the hands of as many redcoat soldiers as we can so that they would realize that they could come over to their brethren in America and they could have their freedom, ease, affluence, and a good farm. As it turns out, we were very successful at getting this document into the hands of British redcoat soldiers. But as propaganda goes, it was very ineffective. The reason is that although 95% of the American militiamen could have read this, that number was never above 15% in the 18th century British Army. And so although they received the message, they were unable to read it and probably used the paper for nothing more than to measure out gunpowder to send lead ball back in our direction. By the time word of the Battle of Lexington and the Battle of Bunker Hill reaches Governor Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia, he begins to realize that if it can happen in Massachusetts, it can happen here in Virginia. In Williamsburg, the capital of Virginia, there's a building called the Powder Magazine. It is a building built in a very specific way to store communal resources of gunpowder. This gunpowder does not belong to the colony, it does not belong to the king, it does not belong to the governor, it belongs to the people of Williamsburg. And it is a common store to put the gunpowder in a safe place that it can be used for the defense. Governor Dunmore thinks he does not want the colonists to have access to that gunpowder, and so in the middle of the night he sends redcoat troops into the Powder Magazine and they take the gunpowder, they remove it and put it onto the warship William, which is anchored in the James River. When the colonists realize that their gunpowder has been stolen, they are determined to get it back. And it is none other than Patrick Henry, who is the captain of the militia of Hanover County, who will call out the militia to go and retrieve the gunpowder. He takes the militia of about 200 men up the Duke of Gloucester Street to the governor's palace, or I should say the governor's mansion. As the militia is approaching, Governor Dunmore sees them coming and he sneaks out the back. He takes his family, they get into a canoe, and they will make their way to the William that is in the James River. It's a very polite militia. They come to the front door and they knock on it. The door will be answered by the ranking member of the household at this time, which happens to be the receiver general, the man who's in charge of receiving goods for running the household. Patrick Henry will say to him, "We've come for our gunpowder." The receiver general will say, "There is no gunpowder here." Henry says, "We will come in and look for ourselves." Not long before this, an unarmed mob in Boston stormed the residence of the governor of Boston, and they tore the house apart by hand, threw all the furniture into the street, stripped the wainscoting off the walls, and left it a ruin. The receiver general realizes that if this militia comes into the governor's mansion, they will destroy it. And so, very quick thinking, he says, "Well, hold on a moment. How much do you think that gunpowder was worth?" It is a question that Henry is not prepared to answer. He goes back and consults with the militia and comes back with a number of 330 pounds sterling, roughly twice what the gunpowder was actually worth. But the receiver general knows a bargain when he sees it, and he says, "What a coincidence, I happen to have just that amount on hand." He then goes to collect the funds and in gold and silver coin delivers that amount to the militia. The militia is not expecting this outcome as the day's work. And so they realize they must acquire new gunpowder with this money, but first they decide we must go to the tavern to discuss how we will go about it. The real hero of the day, from the governor's perspective, should be the receiver general, who diffuses the situation by paying for the gunpowder that the governor has ordered from the magazine. Of course, when Governor Dunmore finds out what has happened, he is furious, and he will issue an arrest warrant for Patrick Henry. This then becomes the wanted poster for Patrick Henry. Whereas I have been informed from undoubted authority that a certain Patrick Henry of the county of Hanover and a certain number of deluded followers have taken up arms and have chosen their offer, styling themselves an independent country, etc., 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 ordering none of the colonists shall aid or abet them, but to facilitate their swift and speedy capture. Well, as you can imagine, the situation in Williamsburg will only go from bad to worse. And ultimately, the governor will flee with his family permanently, and they will take up their residence on the William there in the James River. From there, he will issue this, perhaps his most controversial proclamation. In November of 1775, Governor Dunmore will proclaim martial law. So the civil authority now is closed. All laws will be enforced by the British regulars. But the most controversial part of this document is that he will offer freedom to the slaves of any rebel. Now, if you happen to be a slave who is owned by someone who's loyal, this offer does not extend to you. But if you are a slave owned by someone who is a patriot, then if you can but make your way to join the British Army, Governor Dunmore will grant you your freedom. The offer is made only to men who are able to bear arms and fight. So the very young, the very old, the women are not invited to come and claim their freedom. Many, many slaves will desert their masters and they will go to join the British Army. In some cases, they will bring their children and their wives with them. To Governor Dunmore's credit, he will offer them their freedom as well, even though it was not officially offered in this proclamation. Now, you'll notice something missing from this proclamation. There is no royal crest at the top. That is because when Governor Dunmore flees, he neglects to collect the seal. He neglects the plate that can print that seal. And so, even though this is an official proclamation, it lacks some sense of legitimacy because he's not able to reproduce the royal crest there at the top. This is the very first printing of the Declaration of Independence. The first copies came off the printing press late in the night of July 4th, 1776. We wasted no time in getting this printed. The day that we actually voted for our independence in the Continental Congress was the 2nd of July. It was that day that John Adams recorded in his journal would be remembered by the inhabitants of this continent from one coast to the other with celebrations, illuminations, bonfires, etc., that it would be marked every year. He got the celebration right, but got the day wrong by 2 days. The reason was, even though we voted for our independence on July 2nd, we didn't have the official wording approved until July 4th. So after we voted for independence, we spent a day and a half getting the wording just right, and the final words were approved on July 4th. And so it was that day that will then appear at the top of the Declaration of Independence. Now, Congress is declaring independence on behalf of 3 million of people, but they printed only 200 copies. They sent one to George Washington. He had it read to the troops. They sent one to King George. He was thrilled to get it. In fact, they sent 2 to King George. They wanted to make sure that he got the message. But most of them came to people like me, Isaiah Thomas, because I am a printer of a newspaper. And Congress knew that this was big news. And if they sent it to the printers of newspapers, that this would then be disseminated throughout the colonies at no cost to Congress. And it was big news. I then set out to print this in my own newspaper. You'll notice an interesting thing about this is that as everything that comes out of Congress is signed by 2 people. It's signed by the President of Congress, John Hancock, and the Secretary, Charles Thompson. It is a short time after this that someone in Congress will say, wait a minute, this one's different. We should all sign it. The handwritten declaration will be written. Sometimes we call that one the original declaration, but it is in no sense the original copy because 200 printed copies were made first. It will take Timothy Matlock roughly 2 weeks to transcribe this onto the parchment that stands as the official copy of the Declaration of Independence that it resides in the National Archive today. But most people in America will read the Declaration something like this, as printed in a newspaper. And more will read it in this image than any other because this is my printing. The Massachusetts Spy has a broader readership than any other newspaper. Now you'll notice that the full text of the Declaration doesn't quite take up the whole front page. And as a businessman, I'm not about to leave this bottom corner blank. And so right here next to the Declaration of Independence, I have inserted an advertisement for an apothecary shop. It is quite possibly the best money ever spent in print advertising because now, more than 240 years later, we are still printing the advertisement for the apothecary shop of Messrs. Shepherd and Hunt. Sadly for them, they are no longer reaping the benefits of this advertisement, now having been out of business some 200 years. Now, as was common with the printings, there were small typographical errors, and 3 have crept into this particular printing. Let me read you one sentence and see if you can hear the problem. We hold these truths to us self-evident, that all men are created equal. Instead of saying we hold these truths to be self-evident, we hold them to us self-evident. It fundamentally changes the character of one of the most important sentences in the Declaration, and it was common for there to be small errors in the reprints that were sent about throughout the colonies. So by late 1776, Congress orders another printing to be made. This then will stand as the first official printing of the Declaration of Independence. By this time, Congress has fled Philadelphia. British are on their way. There's no one to stop them. They will reconvene in Baltimore. Their old printer, John Dunlap, is not able to flee. He has printing presses. He has cases of type. He has a business. Plus, the British are coming, and they will need things printed as well. As a businessman, he will begin printing for the British. They need to find another printer. The official printer for Congress when they convene in Baltimore is Mary Katherine Goddard. Congress will choose a woman to be their printer. Now, to many people today, that may seem strange because they might think that in my day, Congress would think Mary Katherine should be at home raising kids, not running a business. But that is an 18th century idea that comes to this country about 1850. It's Victorian in nature. By the late 1700s, it's perfectly normal for a woman to be the sole proprietor of a business, and Congress has no hesitation hiring Mary Katherine to be their official printer, really for 2 reasons. Number 1, she's the best printer in Baltimore, and number 2, she's also the postmaster, so not only can she print, she can deliver. By this time, we have had the engrossed copy of the Declaration written out, and 55 of the 56 signers have signed their names to the Declaration of Independence. And so this becomes the first printed copy to bear the names of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Something else interesting has happened. If we look at the very first printing of the Declaration of Independence, we will see that this is a declaration. But when we look at the first official printing, we see that it is the unanimous declaration. Wasn't it unanimous on July 2nd when Congress voted for it? And the answer is no, it was not unanimous because the delegation from New York had not been authorized to vote for independence. It's not until the representatives of the people in New York find out that the rest of the colonies have declared their independence that New York authorizes their delegation to vote on behalf of the Declaration. And so this then becomes the first printing to bear the word unanimous in the heading. And so there's a lot to like about this printing. But my favorite thing about this printing is that Mary Katherine Goddard has given us a very nice woman's touch. It is the only printing of the Declaration of Independence to be adorned with 63 flowers right down between the two columns of text. That will become a more broadly circulated copy than the original printing because Congress felt it was important to get the correct text exactly as it was written and approved into the hands of Americans. So, Congress has moved from Philadelphia to Baltimore. As the British have taken over the city of Baltimore, they are looking to get new recruits for their army. General Howe, who's there, will issue this handbill. It is a call for individuals to join the 1st Battalion of Pennsylvania Loyalists, commanded by His Excellency Sir William Howe, K.B. That's his title, a Knight of Bath. It is an honorary title that he received as for his work as a general in the British Army. Here then is painting a very rosy picture of what life is like in the British Army and promises those who will sign up, such spirited fellows who are willing to engage, will be rewarded at the war's end, besides with their laurels, with 50 acres of land in any county they shall choose, where every gallant hero may retire and enjoy his bottle and lass. Moreover, a bounty of $5 will be paid if you'll join up now. And so this will become a handbill that the British circulate to try to get loyalists to join the army to fight for their king. As the war moves forward, Congress will make another proclamation. This proclamation will come in 1778. By this time, we have demonstrated as Americans, now newly declared independent country, that we are able to hold our own against the British. And yet by this time, the war is not really going in favor of the Americans. And yet Congress feels that there may be many who are still loyal to the crown because they feel like they have expressed some loyalty and now will not be welcomed to fight against the crown with their fellow Americans. This document is a resolution from Congress recommending that the individual states shall offer clemency to anyone who has acted against the cause of liberty here in America. That if they will renounce the king and come and fight for the independence of America, they should be forgiven of past transactions. The idea is that if people now are fighting against America only because they think they won't be welcomed, we want to convince them that we will let the past be the past and welcome their efforts to help defend American freedom. 1781, we will have the final real battle of consequence, the Battle of Yorktown, the final conclusive battle that will convince the British that trying to subdue a continent is folly. After the war, we have a very interesting situation that Congress did not have gold and silver to pay all the soldiers who fought for American independence. And so they paid them with Continental notes. They are essentially IOUs that they would be able to collect at some future time for real money, gold and silver. And yet these farmers, some of whom had been away from their farms for 6 to 8 years, they couldn't wait for Congress to make good on paying them the value that they had been promised. And so they are forced to trade these Continental notes for whatever the market would bring. They might go to buy seed to replant their fields, and what they have is a stack of notes that they've been paid with that are a promise to earn money at some future time. And that would then leave the merchant with the decision, should I accept this, not knowing if the Congress would ever make good on the note. And so typically these notes traded for about 1/4 of their face value, 1/4 of what they were really promised in terms of real value. At the worst time, these notes were trading for about 1/40 of their value. It turns out that both the Massachusetts Congress as well as the Continental Congress will pledge that they will redeem all of their notes at face value, which is great news if you happen to hold those notes, but pretty upsetting news if you were someone who had sold those notes at an earlier time. Now the question is, how are they going to come up with the funds, the real money, to be able to pay off this debt? And the one way that governments raise money is through taxation of one form or another. And so in Massachusetts, there will be about a 500% increase in tax to be able to pay for these wartime notes. It seems strange that the very soldiers who were paid with these notes, who received a very small amount of their face value, are now the ones who will be taxed. The tax comes in a couple of forms. One is an increased property tax, but the big portion of it will be collected as a poll tax. That is, a tax levied on the head of every man 16 years of age or older. And now here's the kicker. The tax has to be paid in specie, coin that jingles when you drop it on the table, silver or gold coin. It doesn't matter if it's a Spanish coin or if it's an English coin, but if it has intrinsic value, that's how you have to pay the tax. It turns out that if you were a farmer in Massachusetts, you had very little need for gold and silver coin. If you had a farm of 40 or 50 acres, you could easily grow everything that you would need to feed and clothe your family, and still have enough room to have a cash crop that you could bring to market to earn 3 or 4 pounds to be able to buy whatever manufactured goods you might need. But now, as every farmer is bringing whatever they can to market to be able to raise enough gold and silver coin to be able to pay the tax, they find out that they have flooded the market. The price of every commodity has dropped substantially. They are not able to raise the funds and are not able to even earn any more money than they might have normally earned in a regular year. And so they now find themselves unable to pay their tax. Without the ability to pay their tax, the government now will extract value by seizing their farms. A man named Daniel Shays will organize several of his fellow ill-treated former soldiers to make resistance against the seizure of their farms. And they will do this by occupying the courthouse. And so at this time, courthouses, they held session 1 or 2 days a month. And so an itinerant judge would come to sit and make whatever judgment is necessary, and the cases would be brought at that time. And so to be able to transfer the title of a farm from a farmer to the state so that it could be sold to pay the tax, we had to have the transaction happen in court. Shays and his other men would simply bar the courthouse, preventing the judge from coming so that the transactions could not happen. And by blocking the courthouse for a day or two, they would be able to give themselves an additional month before the court could sit again. Courthouses were blocked in several cities in Massachusetts, including my hometown of Worcester, that the Shaysites simply blocked the courts from being able to open. This will become known as Shays' Rebellion, and it will demonstrate the fact that the government of the United States of America doesn't really have the power to put down this kind of a rebellion. And it was a rebellion that many people of the day felt was a just rebellion. And in one sense, it's an open question as to how this should be treated. Not long before, we had thrown off an oppressive government who was treating us badly through improper taxation. And in many respects, the same thing was happening here in Massachusetts. Shays' Rebellion will be put down by a private militia raised under the guidance of Governor Bowdoin of the state, but paid for by wealthy people of Boston, and it will be suppressed. It was such an unpopular thing to do, to just suppress this rebellion, that Governor Bowdoin has no hope of re-election, and he is defeated at the next election cycle in a landslide by the new governor of Massachusetts, none other than John Hancock. And so John Hancock will produce this proclamation offering clemency to all of the Shaysites rebels except for a few named individuals, as long as you come in and register yourself and surrender your weapon. It was Shays' Rebellion that will convince Americans of the need for a stronger central government than we have under the Articles of Confederation. There's only one body that is put forward, that is the Congress. So the idea of having a more developed central government that has an executive branch with the power to act decisively against rebellions becomes something that is more generally accepted. And so what we have here is a very interesting and unique document. It is 8 pages long. It is what we call the first secret draft of the Constitution. In my day, we called it the Federal Convention. You would call it the Constitutional Convention. They meet and they will have several different plans presented. The plan that is most closely followed in the production of the Constitution is what was known in my day as the Virginia Plan. It was presented very early in the convention, and the mind behind it, of course, is James Madison. It is so well put together that there's a sense, almost a sense of euphoria, that this whole convention will not take that long. We might be able to, with a few modifications, adopt the Virginia plan. Virginia is a large state, and so it pushes the balance of power in the direction of the larger states. Well, smaller states like New Jersey, they're less interested in the Virginia plan. But shortly after, they put forth their own plan called the New Jersey Plan. We then also have a plan from North Carolina, which is in many respects very similar to the Virginia plan. And finally, we have a plan that comes from New York that is really the work of Alexander Hamilton. Interestingly, all of the plans until Hamilton's plan, they are read, they are debated, they are discussed at some length. Hamilton's plan put forth a plan that was very, very similar to the organization of Great Britain, and although it was listened to politely, no one felt the need to discuss it seriously, and it was just cast aside. But after these 4 plans are presented, the sense is that we need to have something written down that the delegates can to annotate and to be able to look at and discuss. And so we have a committee formed to take all the plans that are put together and put them into something that we can talk about. And so they will put together this draft of the Constitution. Our final Constitution has 7 articles. The first draft of the Constitution has 23 articles. From the very beginning, these men are trying to reduce the size and the scope of the central government, at least as it was initially proposed. Interestingly enough, this document was printed in secret by John Dunlap, the same man who printed the first copies of the Declaration of Independence. And so it was printed with these very large margins so that it could be annotated during the convention. Now, at the end of the convention, George Washington, who was the president of the convention, calls for all of these copies to be collected so they can be destroyed. They do not want the people of America to know what else they were considering. The idea is that the Constitution should stand on its own as the document as it is, without wondering what else were we thinking about. A handful of delegates will smuggle their copies out of the convention who disobeyed the orders of their leader, and it will be decades before those copies are found in their final working papers. Finally, then, we have the early printing of the entire Constitution. And so this is the way the Constitution was first printed in my state of Massachusetts, printed by my fellow patriot printers, Eads and Gill. So we have here the full text of the Constitution ending here with the signers of the Constitution. We then have the order for this to be published and sent out to the states. But the interesting thing here is that we also have a letter that's written by George Washington, without question, the most beloved American, urging the individual states to adopt this Constitution. It would take 2 years from the time that the Constitution is ratified in 1787 until September 17th, 1789, until the 9th state will ratify it, and this will become the highest law of the land. So I'd like to thank you for spending the time with me today to look at this very important part of American history.
As we leave this colonial print shop, we thank Gov. Allen for stepping into the shoes of Isaiah Thomas. His dedication, research, and rehearsal made these stories feel vivid and authentic. The past isn't just dates and documents, it's people. We hope you will join us again.